I want to circle back to kind of when you broke down the history of Sufism in Britain, kind of divided it into 3 periods.
Yeah.
Maybe could you talk a little bit about that 3rd period?
Yeah.
And how does Tasawwuf or Sufism shift or change? Or maybe it doesn't change in the United Kingdom with this 3rd kind of grouping of Sufism compared to the 2nd, from the Indian subcontinent.
Right.
How would the Sufism change or shift, and what kind of happens?
Well, I mentioned sort of slightly, we have this kind of cultural shift and this more intellectualized kind of expression, if you will.
What does that look like? What would be an intellectualized?
Yeah. So, as I say, this kind of middle period that we're referring to was more defined by ritual practice, right? Very emotional, very devotional, very ritual-centric, right? Not necessarily high intellectual conversations, not necessarily for people who were religiously literate, if you will, at a high level anyway. And also I want to say that's not to dismiss anyone's experience or create hierarchy in that sense. It's just the way that it was, in that many of us are not scholars, right? But when this kind of late 90s, early 20th century influx of non-South Asian scholars happened, they were really talking in the language of kind of socio-spiritual politics, in a sense. There was a polemical sectarian element here. In the 80s and 90s, the kind of Salafi Ahl al-Hadith movement had gained real significance, with things like Islamic societies at universities and people, talking about kind of the political element, the ummah and the global politics of the Muslims, and how, we need to move. The rhetoric really was, let's move away from just ritual practice and private Islam and look at a public-facing Islam, and a Islam not that can bring us all together, so therefore is not culturally laden, but is just as, and we've heard the tagline, Quran and Sunnah, right? And so we can go into the theology of it, if you will, but this is not significant. What I'm talking about is kind of the social impact of it. And so we see lots of these children of South Asian Brits and the immigrants
who originally would have been perhaps...
I mean, it's most likely that their tradition, they would have come from
like
the
Barelwi
or the Ubuntu tradition.
Right, yeah.
Right? And so then you get this rhetoric of kind of a very, very enticing rhetoric, and, and talking in language of Quran in Arabic. Language was huge. Right? And that you have to,
because it's not Urdu anymore, so the language is...
And it's almost like this is a universal language of Islam, arguably. So let's just go straight to the Quran, and let's go to the Sunnah, and let's go to a pristine, unchanged and uncomplex version of Islam. Again, very enticing in that moment in history. But there were people who, domestically and within families, this caused a lot of discord for, right?
Because the children are kind of maybe shifting away and gravitating towards another way of looking at things. The parents are obviously
discontent with this because it's away from their tradition, particularly when it becomes quite combative and it's, these beers are all, sort of, charlatans, and, conversations like that are happening. And this tariqah system is, a bid'ah, and, it's the esotericism that's often associated, the metaphysics that's associated with Sufism is all kind of nonsense, and we, all of that kind of stuff. We have to think with our brains, Quran, Sunnah, etc.
So this is the kind of the landscape.
That's the landscape, really. And then again, this is kind of late 90s, post 9/11. You can, again, that's a different conversation, the kind of sociopolitics of it. But then you get an influx of these Sufi preachers. Who are not South Asian, but
where are they coming from?
So you get, a big one is someone like, so the defining characters, if we're looking at people in that middle section, probably someone like Bir Maruf, who was in Bradford, Bir Imdad Hussain Birzada, who is the principal and founder of Jami al-Karam, the very, very large scale seminary, Barelwi seminary, the biggest in Britain actually, Bir Munawwar Shah in Birmingham. So these are people who are kind of from Pakistan, actually. All three of them are from Pakistan originally, and then who've come over in that sort of middle period that as we're discussing. Then the people who are coming are Sheikh Nur Hamim Keller, for example, who is a convert but now lives in Jordan. You get people like Sheikh Nazim Al-Haqqani, who's a Naqshbandi from Cyprus, a Cypriot Sheikh. Slightly later, you get Sheikh Muhammad Al-Yaqubi, Sheikh Muhammad Al-Ninawi, Syrians, both of them.
Right.
And what you see then is they offer almost an antidote to that Quran and Sunnah rhetoric that we're hearing from the Salafis or Ahl al-Hadith, right? And they're saying, no, the Sufi tradition is also from the Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah.
And you get more of an intellectualized English language conversation amongst the youth. They're thinking, this is absolutely fantastic. And again, Bauer and Sadiq, Jeeves, they've all written about this. It's not a new phenomenon that I'm pointing to. But the conversation is, from the dinner table, is, Dad now likes this guy because, he does Mawlid. Yeah, we call it Milad, you call it Mawlid now, but that's fine. Yeah, same thing. Oh, you revere the messenger of God the way that we do. Fantastic. What more do we want? Do you see that? And the sentimental attachment is not kind of severed in the way that had been earlier with the kind of Wahhabi or pseudo-Salafi kind of rhetoric that's being espoused. But it's highly intellectualized, is deeply rooted in, Sunni normativity, with learning, they're starting to study books of tradition, from the Ash'ari school usually, the books of fiqh, going back to those things. And they suddenly feel intellectually empowered as well as spiritually comfortable, if you will, with their already inherited tradition from their parents. And so you see this fantastic meeting and bridge, if you will.
So would we say there's almost like a resurgence maybe, or?
I would say that, so we're in 2025, right? And I would actually argue we're in a fourth stage.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll
let's
get
not
to
go
that. No, let's go there, because it would be interesting to know what you mean by...
So, 10, 15 years ago, then you get a lot of these Brits that I'm referring to who are going into the bayah with these Sufi sheikhs. So lots of now...
You're talking about the non-South Asian...
Yes, with their non-South Asian kind of Sufis.
Right.
So I would say that, where 10, 15 years ago in Britain, we have a massive influx of people taking the bayah with these non-South Asian sheikhs, becoming Shadhilis and Darqawis from Syrian and North African tradition predominantly, although, in different places also. Whether that now is sustainable is the same sort of predicament that the migrants found in the early 90s, that their children have a different experience. It's not so conflicting in that one are, South Asian born and one group is, and the next, one generation is South Asian born and the next is British. But even amongst the Sufis now who have children who are older, because the Sufi tradition is also deeply, deeply entrenched in familial ties in a way. My father's sheikh was such and such, and so I've also taken the bayah with this. Yeah. That's quite normal. It's not necessary, but it's very normative and very much what happens in lived experience. And so I suppose now we go into a fourth stage. And this is where digital spaces become really significant, because a lot of people, although sentimentally they might feel an inclination towards Sufism, actually, whether they are sitting in Sufi gatherings is far more questionable.
That's interesting.
Because so much of experience, and this goes way beyond Sufi practitioners, but actually lots of Muslims now in Britain and beyond, their experience is a digital one. If they have a fiqh question, dare I say it, they might ask an AI-generated tool, right? And so we see now that their genuine experience and their genuine religious convictions and literacy is coming from the digital world. And so are now the children of that third group, if you will, or that third wave, are they really going to sit in the same gatherings of their parents, even where 20 years ago or 10 years ago, it really spoke to them in that moment in history? We're now in a whole new one.
Yeah.